Hello and welcome to Scandinavia House and tonight's book talk, The Friday Night Club, a novel of the artist Hilma von Klint and her creative circle. It was published on May 16th by Penguin Random House. And joining us tonight are the novel's three authors, Sofia Lundberg, Alyson Richman, and M.J. Rose, and will be moderated by Lori Fredrickson. The book is available on sale out in the lobby here tonight, so if you haven't picked up your book, I encourage you to do so. Book sales at these events do help support literary events at Scandinavia House. Scandinavia House hosts programs throughout the year, both in-house and virtually. They include concerts, film screenings, lectures, literary events, and children's programming. So please do visit scandinaviahouse.org for everything that we have on to offer. And if you're interested in great Nordic artists, we have a new film on the Norwegian artist Edvard Munch screening here tomorrow called Munch. It's a very interesting film by the Norwegian director Henrik Martin Dahlbakken. Okay, so Sofia Lundberg is a journalist and former magazine editor who has been acclaimed for her heartwarming and heart-wrenching Scandinavian fiction. She lives in Stockholm with her son. Alyson Richman is a USA Today and number one international best-selling author, an accomplished painter. Her novels combine her deep love of art, historical research, and travel. And M.J. Rose is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author. She grew up in New York, exploring the galleries of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the dark tunnels and the lush gardens of Central Park. So please give a big round of applause for the three artists.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's a wonderful book. I so enjoyed reading it. And I thought I'd start out by asking you what inspired you to write the story.
I don't know which of us should start. So I think it was back in 2019. The Guggenheim had a wonderful exhibition on Hilma of Klint. And I had friends in Sweden who told me that I should go and see it. I knew nothing about Hilma at all. I'd never even heard of her name. And as I started to wander through the museum, I came across this black and white photograph of her when she was a young art student. And underneath there was sort of this placard. And it described that, Hilma every Friday night would meet with a group of friends, and they called themselves the Friday Night Club. And they would have séances and try and communicate with the masters on the other side of the realm, and that they used information from these séances to create what became the temple paintings. But there was no mention of who the women were. They were just this nameless footnote, a part of this Friday Night Club circle, because they met every Friday night. So I reached out immediately to my friend Melise, M.J., because I knew that she had done books in the past that dealt with spiritualism and the occult, and asked her if she knew about it. And she had heard about it. She'd already heard people telling her she had to see this exhibit. And I guess after she went to it, we started to think about wouldn't it be an interesting book if you could create a story of not just Hilma's backstory, but also the curator putting together this exhibit, and then who were these other four women who were this nameless footnote. And I'm talking a lot, but there's a lot of inspiration behind that initial voyage to the museum. And I had met Sofia in Norway just a few months before that. And we had this instant connection, right? And so I reached out to her and asked her if she knew Hilma. And I started to think about this collaboration of could we all come together to create a book that was about not just Hilma, but these other women who had almost been written out of history.
And how about the other two of you? What were your experiences with Hilma af Klint before writing the book?
Well, I had seen her paintings in Sweden. They had an exhibition on the Modern Museum in Stockholm in 2014. And I love the paintings. They're very nice. So when Alyson called me, I instantly knew that I wanted to be in the project. It was also in the middle of the winter. It was very dark. It was cold. I was in my car getting groceries, very tired, and I was so lonely from, writing every day. And I was longing to do some collaborations. So when Alyson called me, it was like a gift from the sky in this cold Swedish winter weather. So I said, yes, let's write a book. And then after I realized that I'm not a native English-speaking person. How am I going to do this, write a book in English? But we managed.
And do you want to share anything about what your writing process was like? How did you decide how you wanted to collaborate?
Well, that was very difficult, actually. Part of it is because Sofia doesn't write in English, and part of it was because there were 5 women. And originally we thought we should have 5 different people writing the book, plus the modern day part, which clearly very quickly became ridiculous because there would be no way to combine all 5 people. So we kind of split it, where I took the modern day part so that one person would have that voice, and Alyson and Sofia would take the historical part, so there'd be one voice there. Because it would be okay if there were 2 voices, but you couldn't have more than 2 voices in the book and have it be cohesive. So it was actually, once we figured it out, it wasn't that difficult.
And do you want to share, you shared with me right before we started talking about the unusual timing of how you wrote. Do you want to?
So we were lucky enough to sell this book on proposal. So we had just sort of written an outline of what we hoped to achieve with the book. But it wasn't yet COVID. We were hoping that we were going to get to go to Sweden, do the research in person, and then all of a sudden in the spring 2020, COVID hit. And so although it prohibited us from being in person together, working or traveling and doing the research together, it gave us a lifeline to write the book together. It was, I began every morning talking to Sofia. We would always say I was talking into the future because she was already 6 hours ahead. And, it also enabled Sofia and I to have all this endless wheel of productivity because she could be working before I called her at 9 in the morning. She had that whole, morning and early afternoon. And then I would take over and start writing, turn in the pages on Dropbox to her to work with. And so that was sort of wonderful. But on a metaphorical level, I think we were all supporting each other. We were all trying to create something beautiful that was going to, outlast us and also pay tribute to female art, creativity and artistry. And during COVID, that gave us sustenance, I think.
It was a lifesaver for sure. I think we were talking every day. Oh, we kept talking every day. We still talk every day. 2 o'clock in Sweden. Yeah, Alyson calls. But having this project together was a joy. So I was doing the research because I could read everything that was written about Hilma in Swedish, and I went to the Royal Library and I read her journals, and then I could share it with Alyson, and we could come up with a storyline together. And we said that I was drawing the story with charcoal, and you were adding the colors. So that's why when you read the book, I could never write that good English. But I can come up with a story and I could do the research, and then you were the one who artistically made the language beautiful.
That's very sweet. And she's being way too modest, but we work together.
And I was just out in the cold, miserable, alone, writing my part. Because I had nobody to write with, so I just was by myself.
But I still spoke to MJ every day.
We have to start talking every day, too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask also, was this plotted out all in advance, or did you develop the story more in the process?
Maybe you should go first.
Well, the modern day part, I worked out the whole story up front with figuring out so the idea was that I would use Eben, the character's name is Eben, the curator. We would use him as the voice of questions because there are so many questions about Hilma that nobody knows the answer to. There was no biography. She didn't leave a lot of things. One of you should talk about what she actually did. She put her artwork away so that when she died, her artwork wouldn't come out for 20 years after her death. She was a very private person. So there are a lot of questions about what did the Friday Night Club really do? Some of those women were artists. Were they involved? We had a lot of people that we spoke to who believed that some of those people were artists who were very involved in those paintings, who actually painted some of those paintings. So Alyson and Sofia couldn't ask those questions, and they couldn't deal with that part of it the same way that the curator in 2009 or 2018 could deal with it. He could ask questions and bring up issues that were really very controversial that I've heard have not gone over very well in Sweden. But we put them in the book anyway because we really believe that they're really, it's really an issue, is who was involved and did Hilma do everything alone? So that part had to solve that problem. And then I think you guys should talk about what you were planning on doing.
I think also adding on to what you said, because MJ was working in solitary, I don't want to say confinement, but she was working in her solitary room. We had a lot of your pages before we started writing. I think we were still.
Oh yeah, I wrote the whole thing before you started, so that part was already written.
So there were things that MJ discovered, such as that there's a footprint in one of the paintings that they believe was not Hilma, that they believe was one of the women in the Friday night club. And so when we saw that in your document, we knew that we wanted to have a painting scene where someone steps in the painting, and it was almost like a duet. We were taking and then answering it in a more perhaps subtle suggestion in our pages, but you were having the assistant curator raise the questions. And so it was this sort of dance between us, right?
Yes, and we also, the story about Hilma, it's a saga, and it's created by Hilma's family when they discovered and when they decided to show the paintings to the world. But there's family to the other women too, like Anna's family and Cornelia and Mathilda's family. So we reached out to their relatives, and they have a different story and a different view on what happened. So we decided very early on to, when it comes to Hilma, we listen to Hilma's family. When it comes to Anna, we listen to Anna's family. When it comes to Mathilda and Cornelia, we listen to their family. Sigrid, the fifth person, we didn't have any relatives to talk to, but the other ones we had. And then we started to, because Hilma's family had said that Hilma was this, she was this unknown person who suddenly they just found these pictures and they were so amazing. But that's not really true, because she had her studio in the most important art building in Stockholm at the time. And at the time, Stockholm wasn't a big city. So if you were an artist, you would go to this place, the house, and it's called near to Kungsträdgården in Stockholm. And she had her studio there. So she was very much an active artist. And we thought that was so strange that the family didn't highlight that. And we wanted to do that. And then we could also find material, like we have a scene in the book where Hilma and Anna dresses in male clothing, and we found a picture of two other women who had their studio in this building, a picture of them dressed up in suits. So we took some of the research we did outside this group of the 5 women.
Did you do any other kind of special research for this, and was there anything else you found that surprised you?
I think the thing that surprised me the most early on in the research was the burning of the letters, that Hilma had destroyed so much of her correspondence with Anna Cassel, who is one of the women of the 5. They called themselves De Femme, the 5, and they also had this group, the Friday Night Club. So we interchangeably refer to them as the 5 or the Friday Night Club. So when we discovered that she had destroyed so much of them, it raised another question of what was their relationship, what was she, protecting? Was it just her privacy, or was there another relationship that might have been amorous between the 2 women? And when Sofia was lucky enough to make the acquaintance of Anna Cassel's great, is it her grandniece? How do you say it? Her great grandniece, Marie Cassel. She agreed to talk to me in English about her, thoughts and memories of her that had been handed down in the family over the years of Anna. And she confirmed that she felt that there was something between the 2 women, that there was, she couldn't say that it was consummated, but there was definitely a love affair of the hearts. So I think feeling that we had not the stamp of the approval, but the knowledge that a family member felt that, we felt that we could also suggest that in the book, in the sense of the burning of the letters is the prologue of the book, as Anna and she are destroying the tangible parts that show their relationship.
Yeah, because it was very dangerous for them to, if it had been discovered. In that time, it was illegal. So we could
Some of us think that Hilma is very angry that we did that. Seriously. There are lots of things that suggest that Hilma's not happy that this was written. She didn't want a lot of this information to come out, and we brought it out. So the book is haunted.
So the book deals a lot with themes of female empowerment kind of throughout the book. And so what were you hoping to accomplish through these relationships with these women?
Well, the history of art, women have been written out of the history of art. And it's only been in the last, 20, 25 years that people have really been struggling to bring women back into the history of art. And everybody says that Kandinsky is the artist who created abstract art. And he wasn't. Hilma was. And she's just one of so many women who've been written out of history. I mean, just last week, Françoise Guillot died. I'm sure a lot of you know who she was. She was a great painter. She's 101 years old. And in the second line of her biography, of her obituary in the New York Times, it immediately dismisses her as one of Picasso's lovers and the mother of some of his children, and immediately puts her into that category instead of going on and on about her art. So it was very important for us it was one of the things about the book that really mattered to us, was exploring that and giving Hilma her rightful place as the woman who created and was the first one to start abstract art.
Yeah, and when talking about Kandinsky, as a journalist, I was so curious about him, so I started researching him. And he actually went to Stockholm quite a few times for inspiration. And so Hilma was if you were an artist traveling to Stockholm in those days, the house where Hilma had her studio was the place you went to. So he probably saw a lot of her paintings, I think.
So just to be clear, where her studio was located in the King's Garden, there was also that very famous salon.
Yeah,
Blanche's
salon,
so
which was the art.
There was a restaurant cafe, and then there was an exhibit place.
Yes.
So he would have gone to the place to be seen.
It was the center of the art world in
yes.
Stockholm. And so if he was in Stockholm, he went there. And they've been showing his art next to Hilma's, and it's amazing. They look almost the same. And no one had written about this. And when I discovered that he went to Stockholm, I was like, he must have. We have a scene in the book where he goes up to get some charcoals from her. Yeah. Goes into her studio.
In the salon, and then he needs charcoal, and the maitre d' is like, "Oh, go up to Hilma's studio," and then he sees her paintings.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
I talked to Hilma's relative Johan af Klint about it, and he had believed that Kandinsky had seen pictures of Hilma's art, but he realized that they probably met.
I know some of my favorite scenes in the book when I was reading it were the early ones where Hilma and her friends are sort of discussing, especially when Hilma kind of tries to appear more masculine in one scene. Did you guys have any favorite scenes to write without going into spoilers?
No. No, I mean, I wrote this whole, it was about 120 pages in a heat. I mean, once I had the idea, I just sat down and just wrote every day until the whole thing was done really quickly, inhabiting Eben and the art world. So I guess no was wrong, because I guess it's really the scene outside the Guggenheim where Eben walks in on, so I should say, what's going on in the art world during the time of the book and in reality is a lot of the blood money that's used in the artwork. Or art world, which also really matters to me and is an issue for a lot of people. The Sackler name is being taken off of so many buildings now because of the opiates, and not the opiates. Oh, okay. So we put that into the book because it's part of every show. It's part of how did these things get funded, and so that was particularly interesting to do the research and to actually take the reality of what's going on at a lot of museums and a lot of protests and twist it enough that we could put it in the book without getting sued.
I guess the scene I enjoyed writing the most was, there's a scene that takes place in Venice. And when we bought the Guggenheim catalog, there were a lot of different essays published in that from different art historians, and there was information that Hilma had taken a grand tour of Italy, right after she graduated, and that she had gone to Venice, and that she had a sketchbook and everything. And so we actually have Anna and Hilma go to Venice together, and it's the first time you see them outside of Sweden, where they're anonymous. And we wove in this imagery of swans, because there's many images of swans in Hilma's paintings, a black swan and a white swan you might see, and they're sort of, coalesced in a very abstract, beautiful pattern. And so writing that scene was a lot of fun and something I had never done before, and I'll leave it at that.
I knew you would say that scene when you asked the question.
I did too. I knew she was going to say that scene. Yeah.
Yeah, I liked writing many scenes, especially those. We had things happening when we were writing. We felt that Hilma was with us. It was very strange. Like, we wrote something and it didn't feel good, and then the screen turned black and Alyson panicked. We're both the anxious kinds of people. Like, it's gone.
Haunted.
I got a flat tire after one scene.
And then the screen got turned on again, but the scene was gone, and we couldn't find it. And we were thinking, okay, Hilma erased it. So it was very strange. But there were, I did the research, and I walk a lot with my dog, and I was out walking, and then scenes just came to me, and I couldn't explain how it happened. And I could go to the Royal Library to find something. We needed ideas on what to write, and then a book could just come, and there was a section in the book that was just exactly the things that we were looking for. It was just with the same date. Oh, the date I was there, the date was the same date in the book, and I was like, this is what we're gonna do. So it was very.
There were some spooky things that would happen.
Very
with all
spooky.
of it, yeah.
Yes.
Are there any others you want to share?
Well, I think, Sophia, you had the idea in the beginning when we had to come up with a scene in which all the women come together to make the Friday night club. Like, how did they come together to start this to begin with? And that was something that I think you
Oh, yes, I forgot about that. No, we have a writer in Sweden called Strindberg, August Strindberg. He's very famous, and he was very not nice to the ladies. And that's widely known. He was convicted several times for abuse towards his wives and other women. And so there was this Edelweiss Society that was a spiritual community in Stockholm at the time that had a lot of writers and artists in the group, and he was in that group. And so we started thinking, what would make 5 women go away from that group? They're super interested in the spiritual world. This is the community that involves most of the famous writers and artists, and why did they leave and create their own group? And so I gave Strindberg a little role in in the why. So he didn't act very. Yeah. That was a fun scene to write. Yes.
The funny thing is that when we had our copy editor at the publisher, when we got our notes back, she didn't know who August Strindberg was, right? And you were like, she's so famous.
Yeah. And I was so angry because he was known for being very violent, and after Me Too in Stockholm, the theater Dramaten in Stockholm, there was a lot of, as it was during Me Too, a lot of things coming up to the surface. And after Me Too, they put a statue of Strindberg on the stairs in front of the theater, and that made me so angry. How could they do that? So after that, I put him in the book.
The real light on him.
He came to a meeting, and you can read about it, but I think that's what happened. Something like that. Yeah.
So what are some of the things you're hoping that readers take away from this book?
I mean, for me, I think we probably all, have something different to contribute to that. But for me, I think this idea of collective creativity is something that's really beautiful and unexplored. I think both in the media and in historical fiction, of how to, even if you're writing a novel by yourself, there's so many people who nurture your spirit, who keep you afloat during that process, who, when you're down, pull you back up. And now I'm going to get emotional, but writing this book, we were living in real time that supportive circle trying to bring this book to fruition. And so when I look back at writing the Friday Night Club, it's about this circle of friendship that paralleled the circle of friendship between the 5 women.
Aww.
It's true. I'm not making it up.
That was so good. I can't add anything to that. That was perfect.
Well, now that you've created your own little Friday night club, do you guys see yourselves collaborating again in the future?
Well, I would certainly collaborate.
Yeah, we're
again.
talking about one book. So, yeah. I think so too. It's kind of it's a lonely job to be a writer. You work alone all the time. And so this was very refreshing. And also that's something in the book for Hilma had her friends, and during these séances they made something called automatic drawings, and Cornelia was the one who made the automatic drawings. And the shapes, the circles, and everything that's used in Hilma's art came from Cornelia from the beginning. And I think it's so beautiful that you can work as a team. And for us, when we wrote this book, we had language barriers, and we were on the other side of the world, and there were so many ifs and buts, but we did it, and it's possible to collaborate, and I think that's beautiful.
And I would also just add that, all three of us, have written historical fiction in the past, but there's not for MJ and I think we've had discussions that there's not a lot about Scandinavian artists in historical fiction. I mean, it was something that I think is new. I mean, and also writing historical fiction, there's so much, World War II and writing about France or Paris and things that are often more familiar than Scandinavia for the American readership. So I think it's been really wonderful to bring something new into the forefront of historical readership, that you can be reading and learning from about a different culture, a different art historical legacy there, and trying to bring that beautiful landscape alive, the Nordic landscape and the colors, just writing. I mean, I remember when you were writing the scenes of even first getting to Stockholm and wanting to get that just right of how he saw the buildings and the pastel colors, and when Marie was talking to you about how the light changed, right? And I remember you saying she told you this beautiful thing about the
you're going to do this better, but in Sweden, because of the darkness, when people meet each other on the street at a certain time of year, they start saying, it's turning, right? Yes. Meaning the sun is starting to come back. And how Maria Casals felt that this book was starting to bring the light back to Hilma and to the other women in the group, that we were shedding the light on their lives and giving them a new life. And that was really, it was another one of those amazing things that as we were doing the research and people were talking and saying things, it was so perfect. It was such a great metaphor. And I think that the book does do that. It sheds a light on Hilma and the other 5 women, and also on other women, and mostly women, actually only women, who have used spirituality and séances to find their art. There are about 5 or 6 very famous, not famous to everybody, but in this world, there are other women who have done this and who've created great art by having séances and working with spirits. And that's something that people really, that's still pretty unheard of, but this has brought some light to that too. And it's fascinating to read more about it.
And I think also one of the things that we were often in conversation, all 3 of us, was it wasn't just spiritualism that united these 5 women, but also there's a sense of wanting to know more about science, right? You have the introduction of the X-ray, the atom, and all those things. And you kept on saying to me when we were writing our passages, I want to make sure that there's a science magazine in Hilma's studio, right? I mean, that was so important to you to bring that.
Yeah, she was very interested in science, and she was interested in the future, and Anna was more artistic. So we sometimes said that you were Anna and I were Hilma.
And it was actually science that brought all the séances and the spirituality to the forefront. Now we think of it quite the opposite, but at the time, it was actually science and spirituality that were together.
Yeah, because they realized that we're all atoms and they float around, and so we must,
But also the X-ray, that you can start to photograph the what's beneath the skin, and this idea of that there's something hidden, but it still exists, and it's important to acknowledge it, right?
Yeah, right. And Marie Casals had been fighting for a long time to get attention towards Anna's art. And so I must say that when we started this project, there was nothing about the other 4 women on Wikipedia or anywhere, but it started to come in more information, and the family started to get interested in the other 4 women. And now, for the first time in Brussels, it's going to be an exhibition with Anna's and Hilma's art, which is fantastic.
And We actually saw on the Hilma af Klint Foundation website, their timeline started to include, right, the introduction of Anna during the process of us writing and them knowing
asking
we were writing.
questions and asking and involving the other relatives.
You mentioned that you had been in touch with the families of the other artists during this. Do you have any special stories from that you'd want to share?
Well, Mathilda and Cornelia's family were interesting because the family were afraid of these sisters. And they were doing something strange with some spiritual activity, and it was said that Mathilda was she was very manly. What do you say? Masculine. She was smoking cigars, and so the relative that we talked to, her mother wasn't allowed to meet them because they were considered so masculine, like so strong. I think they were super strong. That's why the family were afraid of them.
I think we were going to open this up to some questions for everybody. Does the audience have any questions that you'd like to ask?
Do any of you have a background in art that you were able to bring to the project?
Well, before I decided to become a writer, I was an aspiring painter. I went to college thinking I was going to major in fine arts. My mother, who's in the front row, she was an abstract painter in her younger years. And so when I was writing with Sofia the scenes of them creating art, I was trying to remember how it was for me to hold a paintbrush and to do that. And then I was also an art history major, so that was, I think, came in handy.
And I was also a painting major at college and got my degree in painting, but I was very bad. So I decided to write about art and artistic things rather than keep getting frustrated how awful my canvases were.
And I'm just a journalist. When I was a kid and I was writing in school, my writing was so bad that my teacher actually tore the paper up and said I should do it again because you couldn't see what I was writing. So no arts. But I'm a journalist. So I'm used to research.
Has the book come out in Sweden yet?
Yes, the book is out in Sweden, and it's out both in what do you call the normal in hardcover, yeah, and now it's out in paperback, and it's actually climbing the bestseller list now, so we're happy about that. Yes.
How is what you wrote being accepted in Sweden now?
Excuse me.
How is it being accepted because of things that you've said about the women in the Friday Night Club?
No, I think a lot of people find it very interesting, and there's a lot of discussion about rewriting history and bringing females in the light in Sweden. So I think that's a process, ongoing process. A lot of people appreciate that.
But do you feel that Helma's, because she's the most famous of the five, that the organization that is in charge of her artwork, that they are upset with what you're writing?
No, they're not. At first, I've been in touch with them a lot during the writing of the book, and they've given us a lot of information. So, for example, for the large paintings, they gave me information on how they technically did it. They did it on smaller papers and put them together. And so they've been very good at giving us information, but they were a little bit upset about some things, but when we talked about it, they realized that there's something to it. And then they started arranging this exhibition with Anna and Hilma. So I think that they liked the story. I really do. I have a lot of contact with Johanna af Klint, who's the oldest relative of Hilma.
I think the one thing that we felt there was some bickering between Anna's family and Hilma's family to this day in 2023 was that Marie Cassel, Anna's grandniece, felt that her family had documentation that Anna had funded the creation of the studio for Hilma late in her life. But Hilma's family felt that she had not financed that. And so they were like nitpicking about this small thing. It's funny, it's like always about money, but there was this thing of who took credit for the painting, the creation of the studio,
yes,
right?
That's the big conflict between the families. which is kind of silly when you think about it. I couldn't understand. We talked about it, and I asked, and I couldn't really understand why it was so important, because Anna has the receipt. So she has a written receipt.
Yes, and she wrote something down saying that she was paying the taxes and she had funded something, and
Yeah.
yet the association was saying it's not true.
Was there a reason that they wouldn't allow you to print any of copies of her paintings in the book?
That's a financial
Yeah.
thing. They don't want to have to pay the foundation money to print in a paper, yeah.
Yeah. So the foundation owns all the paintings, and they rent it out to museums all over the world. So no paintings have been sold.
Did Hilma burn all her letters?
Well, it's impossible to know how many letters she burned, but they know that she burned letters, and they know that she burned notebooks because they were numbered. And she was very organized, so she wrote a lot of things down in her notebooks. And so they know that one notebook is missing and that it's burned. So, and we will never know why she did it. We can just guess.
May I ask, have you watched the movie that came out lately? And if so, what are your thoughts on the outlook and the portrayal of her character?
Can I answer?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, yeah, the Lasse Hallström movie. Well, I think I watched it, and he was working with the material at the same time as we did. And I think it's sad that when women in groups are portrayed, it's often like there's so many conflicts. But when I think about my groups of women, there's never any we never had any conflicts. We had a wonderful collaboration, a giving and loving collaboration. And I believe when looking at these women met every Friday for 10 years. So I think in the movie, we see their relations a bit different from the movie. And the movie was also written by a man.
So such a diplomat, that
Yes.
I have one other question, which is you guys have mentioned a couple times the spooky things happening throughout the book. Do you have any other good examples? And did Hilma's feelings towards you change?
It did, because in the beginning we thought that I think we too thought that there was a conflict, but she became so nice during the process and so smart. She was visionary, and so she saw the future, and she was interested in science, and we admire her, I think.
Yes, and I think that when we were having trouble with different scenes and things sometimes would evaporate, or there was one time I had a really bad writing day and I got a flat tire like leaving my house, and I thought, ooh, she's definitely showing me you have to go in a different direction. But then there was breakthroughs where then things were smooth sailing and we felt like we had her approval. So I feel
when I went into the project, I was talking to a relative of Hilma's, and I said that I'm going to write this book together with 2 American writers, and he said that every person who works with a project about Hilma says that they can feel her presence, that she's there. And I was laughing. I'm a journalist. I don't believe in that. So I was laughing about it a little bit, and I was like, okay, I don't think so. And then, when we got into the process of writing it, it was true. She was there. And now I believe in spirituality.
For the other women in the book are such interesting characters, and it was so wonderful to be able to learn about them. Is there one in particular that any of you would have most liked to have met?
Yeah, it's a very good question.
well, I mean, I think we all want to meet Hilma. I mean, she's certainly the backbone of the story. But if you were to take her out of the equation, I did feel right away very drawn to Anna as an artist, as someone who, I don't want to say she didn't get her, her spotlight, but she was very selfless, and I wanted to do her justice and make sure that her story was told. And so right away, we used to joke when we were writing that I was always advocating to make sure that Anna's story and her art and her contribution was seen.
Well, she was an incredible painter who really, like when you really look, Marie showed us a lot of her artwork, especially her early artwork, versus Hilma's artwork, she was a better representational painter than Hilma was by far. And that was really interesting because, she completely gave up painting for Hilma, it seems.
And we got the feeling through our research that Hilma had a very volatile personality and that she often lashed out Hilma had a very volatile personality and she often lashed out at Anna.
And you, hence the flat tire.
So there was something about making sure that we kept strong with her story to make sure that it was being told that was important.
I would like to meet Mathilda. She was smoking cigars. She was an editor of a magazine, and she was married to a sea captain that was away all the time. So she had her apartment filled with all these exotic things. And I would like to have lunch with her.
And I just wanted to go to the séances.
Do we have any other audience questions?
How difficult was it to find the whole group?
Well, I think it would have been impossible without Sofia.
Yeah, it was difficult because there's not much information. There was no information about them at all, so we had to trust the relatives. But in families, stories are often told about older relatives. So I felt straight away that we could trust them very much with what they said about them.
Did you find the relatives through the foundation? Like, how did you find?
Yeah, I found them through the foundation. They knew the names of them. Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the worst things about all that was at the Guggenheim. And it was such a funny day because Alyson texted me this photograph of the little placard that said the thing about the Friday Night Club the exact same day that my agent, Dan Conaway, who's in the audience, texted me the exact same image, and 3 other people texted me that image about these women who use spirituality to find their art, and their names weren't even in it. I mean, it was so astonishing that the Guggenheim Museum, with all the research that they did, and this amazing exhibit, took these women and they were barely a sentence. And so it was really incredible to have Sofia in Sweden able to do this research because there really couldn't have been a book without the other women, nor should there have ever been a book without the other women.
And to your point about the movie with Lasse Hallström, there was a documentary that came out. It was a German documentary, I think the year before that. And we were all able to see that at some point. But by the time we made contact with Marie Cassel, Anna's grandniece, she was furious that she'd been edited out of that documentary where she talked about Anna's contribution. So she was reeling from that, reeling from being ignored at the Guggenheim exhibit that she came to see. So she definitely was like, and she wanted to make sure now that if we were willing to hear her and thread it into the novel, that we were going to respect Anna's story.
And she's in the book.
Yeah.
And she's at the end of the book, and she comes to the museum.
And I think Hilma would have liked us to tell the story about the other woman because the 10 largest paintings aren't signed, and most artists sign their paintings. So why didn't she sign it? And we can see the shapes in the notebooks that Cornelia did them. So I think she would have liked us to tell this story.
Question, I guess, for Sofia. Did you read the notebooks? Or were you able to read some of them? Because when I went to the museum, because Guggenheim, and she was very like a mathematician science.
Yes.
They're very intricate.
Yes,
right?
yes. I haven't read. I was offered to read all the notebooks, but there's been a lot of research done on the notebooks, where I could read certain sections of them. So I've read them. Yeah, not all of them, but a lot of them. She was very smart, and she was very precise, and she was writing down everything. So she was an interesting person. She was a person who analyzed her whole life and everything that surrounded her.
Yeah, because there's a indication like that they were transmitted, the images through spirit.
Absolutely, yes. The images and the shapes. Yeah, they came to her through the séances, and it was Cornelia who made the shapes, who made the automatic drawings that the spirits.
And they named the spirits who came, like there was
Yes.
George and there was another name. So they really believed that they were communicating with the other realm.
Yeah, and in the notebooks they write about these spirits and what they said. So there's a lot of information about and we've read a lot of those notes.
I have one other question about what you mentioned earlier with your writing process. You said something so interesting that for one of you was the charcoal, and then one was the color for some of these characters. That's so interesting to me. Do you have an example of how that came into play through the book?
Well, it was so important for Sofia and I to feel that our voice was going to be seamless and that we were both going to feel we were seeing our voice on the page as we created those historical chapters. But again, I think because Sofia was in Sweden doing the research and the facts, harvesting them, that she could build almost this scaffolding, almost like, I like to describe it almost like a wire armature where some of the scenes would have shape and form, but because of English not being her first language, that I could add the color and the texture, so it seemed like you were reading chapters that mirrored the lens of an artist. So we worked together to build that out. I think she's being very humble to say that she was the charcoal. I think it was much more than that. But I had read Sofia's books before we started writing this project. So I was very familiar with how she was professionally translated into English. And she's a very sensitive and thoughtful, beautiful writer. And so one of the things that we didn't say is that when we first started writing this, Sofia hired a translator to translate how she saw the initial chapters, and because we were thinking of dividing it. And I read the translator, and I felt that it didn't feel like Sofia to me, and it was a different translator who had translated her in the past. And I said to her, I think we could do this together. If you almost sketch it out, I can build from that. And then sometimes I would just start from scratch and write a chapter completely, ahead of her seeing it, and then she would, fact check it or suggest different language changes of how she heard it as a Swede. So we always had this sort of, duet between us, right?
I've had a 3-year long language course. Now, I sometimes felt a little bit like Pippi Longstocking, I don't know this, so let's do it. It's like, I'm happy that I said yes to the project, but yeah.
Sometimes artists really don't appreciate what they've done until many years later. If you look at, art and music, you're always talking about great works of art and music that were done by individuals, Beethoven's Fifth and things like that. How many books do you know, how many novels of historical fiction were written by 3 people?
Good question.
Do you know? I'm looking at my agent now. I don't know of 3. I do. Yes, of course. There's a team. They call themselves Team W. Lauren Willig, Beatrice Williams, and Karen White. And they've written about 5 books together. And they're historical fiction. And they take, not necessarily a person, but they take places that are real and weave a story around them. So I definitely know about them. I don't know if anybody else, but they've been doing it for about 5 or 6 years.
Well, certainly you're a rarity.
Yes, yes, we are a rarity. Yeah.
And they didn't have an international superstar also in their team. So we add something to the mix with that.
So I have one final question. Did you hold any séances while writing this book? And if you did and you could speak to Hilma, what would you ask her?
Lasse Hallström did, he said. He was talking to Hilma. Have you been talking to Hilma?
No. Well, yes, I tried to we didn't all have a seance, but I did do some exercises meditation exercises, specifically about one thing that I really wanted to know, which we haven't touched on yet, but Hilma, in the paintings, are all the spirals. Spirals are one of the images that she uses over and over and over again. And she the spirits told her that they wanted her to create a temple to paintings, and that these paintings were created for this temple. And she wrote a lot about how they told her this, and this was her job, and that's why they were so big, and they were all going to go in this temple, which was never built. And there's a whole other story about that and how upset she was that she couldn't get Rudolf Steiner to help her build the temple. Meanwhile, years after she dies, Guggenheim is working with Frank Lloyd Wright and a woman whose name I am terribly embarrassed to say I've forgotten, to talk about this museum. And they call it a temple to paintings, and it's a spiral. And it's the exact spiral in the paintings, and it's called the same thing, and it's like 10 years later. And meanwhile, all Hilma's paintings have been put into storage. Nobody's seen them. Nobody's read the notebooks. Nobody knows that these three people building the Guggenheim Museum in Manhattan have no idea about Hilma af Klint or any of this. And yet these two things happen within about 10 years of each other. And I desperately wanted to know if she planted that idea, because it was her, it's what she wanted. Everything that she was doing was to create this temple. And in the end, in 2019, her paintings were in the temple and looked perfect. And a lot of the critics who saw the show said that there had never been a show in the Guggenheim where the paintings seemed to fit the building more than this show. And there'd never been a bigger show. It was the largest number. Over 600,000 people came to the Guggenheim to see the show and went back again and again. And some of them said they didn't even know why they kept going back. So I want to have that conversation with her.
Yeah, the drawing in her notebook looks like Guggenheim.
Yeah.
So I think she did. She
Yeah.
did it.
Is there something you would ask Hilma?
If she likes our book. Very egoistic. Sorry.
And I guess I would ask her who really paid for your studio.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for coming. It's a wonderful book. I'm so glad I had the opportunity to read this.